So to talk a little about experiences in these particular markets, we now have our next speaker, Judith Damiani, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Citrus Australia Limited. And Judith spent a bit of time on trade delegations and in various of these markets, so can give us a good insight as to how the citrus industry, which is actually Australia's largest fresh produce export in the horticulture sector, is faring in these markets. So welcome, Judith.
Thanks very much, and I do want to say a thank you to Mick and the Australian Farm Institute for the invitation to attend and speak to you today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the ASEAN opportunities for Australian citrus. And I wasn't going to comment on this cover slide, but I will because I'm very excited. This is the third slide of citrus you've seen today. And for our little industry, it's great to be on the agenda at an agricultural trade conference, together with dairy and beef. It's very exciting that we've actually made it somewhere. So really just to put it into perspective a little bit, and the reason why I've got this pie chart here is to remind you or inform you where horticulture sits in terms of the value of Australian agriculture. We do tend to get forgotten a little bit, but we are the third largest agricultural industry in Australia. And you can see there, after broadacre crops and livestock, is Australian horticulture. That does not include the wine grape industry. Australian horticulture is a very diverse sector. So you're talking about fruit and vegetables and nuts and mushrooms and nursery and turf and cut flowers. So it's certainly a very wide and diverse sector, but it does represent a significant and one of the fastest growing agricultural industries in Australia. Now, I know many of you think Australian horticulture is fairly domestic focused and sometimes can be a little bit protectionist. I know that's what your shopping basket looks every second day, yes? But really it is very much, as a horticulture industry, very much domestic focused. It is produced and distributed in the Australian domestic market in the majority. But there are certain sectors or industries within the horticulture industry that do have a competitive advantage on the global scale. And this one here, a little pie chart by ABARES, but it does show you that in that year, in 13-14, Australian horticultural exports were valued at just under $2 billion. Again, and not very many people know this, but there is a significant proportion of that industry exported to the world. You can see where the major markets are there, Hong Kong, New Zealand, India, Japan and the Middle East. They're the major markets in a general sense. So if you just take the fresh component, not the processed, but the fresh exports, you can see there's really 5 major commodities that make up nearly 75% of the value of those exports. You can see table grapes and citrus and almonds, carrots and turnips and cherries, almost 75% of the value of fresh produce exports. That's 13-14. I would predict that in this financial year, that little segment by almonds would almost double. So, take it over $1 billion worth of exports in this financial year, as well as increased value for citrus exports and table grapes. Okay, talking about citrus exports in particular, I'm going to show you really our top 12 markets for last calendar year. And you can see Hong Kong, Japan and China are our 3 top markets. But I'm not going to talk about those, which is nice. It's refreshing not to talk about China. But I really want to show you the countries that are growing for our sector. They are coloured in the sort of orange or yellow there. Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand and the Philippines. So keeping that same scale, I'm going to take you 6 years back Look at the difference in terms of how we are servicing those markets and how it has changed. The biggest market we were servicing 6 years ago was the United States. You can see we were still servicing Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore, but particularly Indonesia has doubled in the last 6 years, so the volumes to Indonesia has doubled. Philippines wasn't even on the list 6 years ago. There's been enormous growth just in that little market in the last couple of years. So I'm just going to talk about 4 of those markets, just to give you some details about the complexity working in this particular region. So Indonesia, as I've just explained, has been a very good growth market for Australian citrus, but of course they have their own ways of doing things, and they have a self-sufficiency policy at the moment where they want to try to produce more food themselves for their own people. And unfortunately for us, Indonesia is in the southern hemisphere, which means that we produce and export at the same time they produce their own citrus. So a couple of years ago, back in 2012, they did put in place a lot of new sets of rules and regulations and legislation. They put in place this import licensing regime. They've required to verify food safety standards. Every 2 years they'll come out and audit now, and we're expecting another audit later this year by Indonesia. They had restricted entry into their ports. Fortunately for Australia, we were able to overcome that particular barrier. And tariffs still apply, it's up to 25% for our mandarins. We have been informed that this year they will be not issuing imports for citrus for the months of July, August and September, which coincides with their peak citrus production. Unfortunately, it also coincides with our peak export season. So we are now planning to divert almost 10,000 tonnes of citrus into other markets. And this issue is not an easy one. It is already being disputed at WTO level by the United States and by New Zealand. Australia is a third party to that dispute regarding this restrictive and prohibitive licensing regime. So all we can do is support that process. It's a long-term process, unfortunately, and we have to find other ways of looking how we can overcome these kind of barriers. Philippines, so that's the one that has really grown in the last couple of years. And the reason why it has grown is because they have also reviewed their phytosanitary conditions for imports. They've actually improved them, which is nice to see. And that improvement allowed us to really capture the opportunity in that growing market. I've got a couple of images there on that slide, and they were taken last year when we were doing some in-market promotions in a retail store. And I do want to mention that at the same time we were doing these promotions for Australian citrus with our cute little kangaroo, we also took some photos of the MLA pilot with their True Aussie brand. So there was 2 Australian products running promotions in the same retail store in the Philippines using very different logos and looks. I think we're very interested in looking how we can work together under a common brand or messaging to promote Australian food in some of these markets. Vietnam, I guess that slide says it all. They decided to close the door to horticultural imports from Australia on the 1st of January this year. And the reason is they were concerned about our fruit fly and our fruit fly management. Other people think it's because we didn't allow their lychees or something else to come into Australia. So there's the issues that we face with these countries all the time. The Australian government has worked very hard to try and reinstate this market because it is a growing market and offers a lot of potential. And we did host 3 Vietnamese quarantine officers through the Mildura region about a month ago as well to show them our management systems and our orchard and packing house systems, and to assure them that we do have the right systems in place to service their market and protect their own fruit industries. So we hope very much that they can reopen that country in time for our export season, which has just started. And Thailand, again, good growth experienced in Thailand. The good thing about Thailand is you've heard the FTAs there, that the tariffs have been reduced to zero, so it's not a barrier, but they do still have special agricultural safeguards. They will disappear next year, which is a great thing, because for Australian citrus it was, once you'd reached the 1,000-tonne mark, then they'd slap the 40% tariff on anything that came in after that. So we had to watch the volumes that were going into that market, and put up the red flag as soon as we came near the 1,000 tonnes, so that any exporter was aware that they would, be slapped with some tariff penalties. So it's good to see that they will disappear next year, and we can start to really develop that market. So how do we work within this group of countries, the ASEAN? ASEAN Cooperation, I've called it. So we have to do things together with them as a group, and obviously individually with the countries themselves. And here you've got some points and some photos of Australian government hosted ASEAN cold treatment workshop that was run last month. There was about 20 or so from all the different ASEAN countries. They came to Australia, spent time in Melbourne and in Mildura, to learn about our cold treatment processes and our orchard and packing house systems. And they were taken up to see the orchards themselves, the packing houses and the port. So it's one way to be proactive and strategic, and to help them understand how we do things, and how they can protect their own industries but safeguard our exports into that region as well. So that's where I wanted to end it there. Again, there's a picture of our oranges being sold in the Philippines there, and I just wanted to end by saying there is a lot of opportunity. We really do want to grow our market share in the ASEAN countries. Of course, we still have to service countries like Japan and China, and I can tell you right now that China, we don't have enough oranges to supply them. I think the panel before talked about some slowdown in some of the products in beef and cotton. I can tell you this year for Australian citrus, we don't have enough oranges for them. So we're going to break our record that we set last year. And I guess it's because they're used to eating fruit, maybe not so much dairy or those other products, but fruit is something that they do eat, and they do want imported safe products. So let's hope that these opportunities can continue into the future. So thank you.